Historically, the approach to security has been to try and build a set of rigid policies, a set of rigid rules that everybody had to abide by. And often this approach has been replicated by the government in the policies that they set for cross-government security. And it isn't working. What I'd like to do today is show why moving towards more of a standards-based approach, a principle-based approach, a risk-managed approach to security is going to give us the flexibility and the capability to look after our information, our places and our people much more effectively than before. Now, before anybody takes to Twitter or email or shoots me down in flames, I totally accept that some of the things I'm going to talk about today are not standards in its truest sense, but they can be used as standards. They can be utilised as frameworks, and in case of some of the standards that we're going to talk about, some of the legislation that we're going to talk about, even if it doesn't directly apply to your organisation, it can still be adopted as a set of principles and have benefit to your organisation. So to help to demonstrate the difference between rule-based and principle-based, I thought I'd start by looking at something that I'm sure we've all come across in the past: expenses policies. Now, I think, just like me, many of you will have seen the expenses policy that tells you can have £7.62 for breakfast, and this for lunch, and that for dinner, and a hotel in London mustn't cost more than this, and outside of London it's got to cost even less, and you can't travel by first class. Or you can have an expenses policy that says you'll get reimbursed for expenses that are fair and reasonable. The first is a rigid set of rules to be followed slavishly. The second gives us some principles to work to. The second allows me to think, I'm going to be spending 5 hours on a train today. If I travel first class, I can work. If I travel standard class, I can't. However, tomorrow, when my journey is only going to be 45 minutes, I'll pretty much just dump myself in the second class. Allowing common sense, judgment, allowing individuals to think about particular circumstances and then apply the right solution. So let's start by having a look at cyber essentials. Okay, not strictly a standard, more of a certification scheme. But the principles contained within cyber essentials are designed to allow an organisation to put in place the protective security controls that are needed to protect that organisation and its critical assets from the majority of common cyber threats. A basic level, an entry level standard. Nothing in there, I believe, that any organisation wouldn't look at and go, that makes absolutely common sense. I want to do that to look after my business. So cyber essentials have been introduced in the last couple of years, mandatory in some cases for organisations bidding for government work, to help organisations to put in place that first level framework. Yes, it's not extensive. Yes, it's not comprehensive, but it's a really good first step. Coming out in the last couple of weeks, in support of the government's security policy framework, the new minimum cyber security standard that all government departments are expected to meet, or dare we even suggest, exceed. Again, a set of 10 guiding principles. Organisations should have in appropriate governance, risk management, mechanisms to detect, contain and recover from a cyber attack. Okay, it's a government standard, but is there anything there that you're listening to this and thinking, no, that makes sense. I'd like to have in place good governance and leadership. I'd like to have in place appropriate risk management, and I'd like to be able to detect, contain and recover from a cyber incident. The security policy framework itself. No longer a rigid set of rules, but in more recent iterations, a set of guiding principles. It talks about security must be an enabler for government. It must be based on risk management that is driven from the board. And it recognises that people and behaviours are fundamental to good security. Something that actually I think most of us as security professionals have been saying for a long time. So let's have a look at some recent legislation that's hit the government in the last couple of months. First one I want to look at is called the NIS Directive. The Network and Information Systems Directive, based on 4 guiding principles. 4 principles designed to help organisations who are operators of essential services and suppliers to operators of essential services to ensure that our critical infrastructure is maintained in a safe and secure manner, to make sure it's resilient, and to make sure that in the event of a major cyber attack, it can recover. And the first principle says, have in place appropriate governance and effective risk management to allow you to manage the risks to infrastructure from cyber attack. Now, I've heard many people in the last couple of months say that's too vague. What does that mean? Have in place appropriate governance, have in place effective risk management. Why aren't there more rules? Well, the whole point of this is it very much depends on the nature of the infrastructure you're managing. It depends on its interconnectivity. It depends on the complexity of your supply chain. Now, trying to build a single set of rules that will take into account all of those will inevitably mean that in some cases, organisations will be expected to go over the top. And more importantly, in some cases, organisations may not do enough. So it means that as an organisation, you're able to look at your infrastructure, your risks, your exposure, your vulnerabilities, and then risk manage that by putting in place appropriate security that is proportionate, pragmatic, cost effective, but more importantly, security that still allows you to do your business. Of course, what I find really interesting about the NIS Directive is how little people are actually talking about the NIS Directive. A major new framework with a set of principles to allow us to manage and protect our critical infrastructure, and it hardly gets a mention. Unlike, of course, its rather boisterous cousin, GDPR. Now, you'd have to have been living in a hermit's cave somewhere not to have heard of GDPR. And I'm sure, like me, in recent months, you've been inundated by requests from all sorts of companies asking you to opt in and let them have your permission to continue to market things at you. But actually, that's just the tip of the iceberg of what GDPR is really all about. This whole focus on consent is a bit of a red herring. So let's start by understanding GDPR is not a brand new piece of legislation. GDPR actually brings existing legislation in the UK, the Data Protection Act 1998, up to date. It reinforces data subjects' rights. Sure, it introduces a few new rights for data subjects, but in the main, what it does is it takes something we've always known about data protection, that the protection and the delivery of the rights of the data subject are fundamental, and that we need to look after personal information in an appropriate, proportionate, and risk-managed way. We mustn't be sending personal information overseas unless it's adequately protected. And when we've finished with it, we should get rid of it, not hold on to it indefinitely just in case. Now, for all the marketing hype around GDPR, I don't see anything in that any respectable organisation should be balking at. Collect information for a reason. Know why you want it and be honest about that. Use it for those reasons. Keep it safe and secure. Don't send it to dodgy countries, and get rid of it safely and securely when you don't need it anymore. Now, that's a set of principles for looking after personal information, but those principles apply to all of our information assets, regardless of whether they relate to individuals or not. So why do I think all of this is so important? Well, we live in an ever-increasing interconnected world. Everything we own, at home and at work, is becoming connected. It's all going online. If you've heard of the term the Internet of Things, actually, more accurately, think the Internet of everything. Everything you touch, everything you interact with. Smart homes, smart cars, smart buildings, smart factories, everything apparently is going to go smart. Hey, I've even seen an advert recently for a smart mattress. Now you have to ask yourself sometimes, just because you can, do you really think you should? But this smart mattress will apparently tell us in the morning how well we've slept. Like nobody's woken up in the morning and thought, oh, I didn't sleep particularly well last night. So we need to be aware that with this interconnectivity comes an increasing threat landscape. More opportunities for an attacker to find their way into our organisation. More importantly, there's a lot more of our infrastructure that we traditionally think of as being offline that isn't offline anymore. Think video surveillance systems. Now traditionally, CCTV as it was, closed circuit, offline, on its own network, not connecting into anything else. Now the majority of it is IP based. Not just the cameras, but all of the stuff that sits behind the cameras that allows the system to work. You may have heard a couple of years ago of a thing called the Mirai botnet. Now, a botnet is the harvesting of a whole range of diverse computer-based objects and then using those for nefarious reasons to attack infrastructure, effectively creating a supercomputer out of everyday things. The Mirai botnet included 500,000 digital video recorders that would form part of video surveillance systems. And why were they harvested? Because they were installed and configured in an insecure manner. Because in some cases, the username and password was hard-coded onto equipment inside the boxes. Because in some cases, the dial home facility hadn't been disabled. And because in some cases, obsolete, insecure protocols like Telnet were left wide open. Now we're going to have to get a lot smarter at managing our infrastructure, the non-core IT infrastructure that is connecting into our critical infrastructure, our organisations, our supply chain. Now some great work being done by Tony Porter and his advisory panel. Have a look at the Surveillance Camera Commissioner website and look at the code of practice that's being produced. Again, a set of guiding principles, not rules, to allow organisations to procure, make sure that things are installed, and make sure that things are maintained in a secure and safe manner. To make sure that the resultant data that comes out of these surveillance systems is looked after properly. To make sure that the system is being installed for valid reasons. Only a couple of weeks ago, we were talking in the office here at Advent. A local school had had its surveillance system, which they, for some reason, had decided to install in the boys' toilets, hacked. Now I use the term hacked very loosely because what actually happened was the installer left the camera system with a default username and password. Let's think admin and password. And then the images from that boys' toilet were live streamed onto the internet. And there's software out there now that can be deployed that will find these devices, that does automated scanning across the internet and finds any device that's been left with a default username and password. So talk about getting smarter. We need to be looking at the principles that are contained within these standards, look at the principles that are being produced by people like Tony Porter and his advisory panel, and we need to be applying them. Because they're good things to apply. Because they allow us to protect our infrastructure. Because they allow us to protect our information. And most importantly, because ultimately they also allow us to protect our brand. So I started by talking about a standard called Cyber Essentials, a really minimum baseline set of principles for organisations to adopt to protect themselves, and suitable for any size of organisation. What I want to finish by talking about is a much more robust standard, an international standard, ISO 27001. Now, many people say to me, that standard's an IT standard. But it's not. It's a business standard. It talks about governance. It talks about risk management. It incorporates physical security, business continuity, education and training. In fact, there's only one section in the standard that talks about IT itself. More importantly, ISO 27001 is fundamentally built upon the idea that you need to understand security risk in order to apply appropriate, proportionate, and effective security controls. It has a whole range of guidance for organisations of all sizes to apply. And there's the second point. People say, international standards are only for big companies. Well, here at Advent, we're an SME and we hold ISO 27001 certification, so that can't be true. And in fact, we've helped organisations of all sizes put this standard in, because it's not a rigid set of rules. It's a set of guiding principles to be adopted proportionately based on an understanding of risk. And I've used this term throughout this presentation, risk. We must get better at articulating and understanding risk. That means we've got to have a better understanding for our individual organisations and our supply ecosystem of where the threats are coming from and where our organisation is vulnerable. And by understanding how a threat might exploit those vulnerabilities, selecting appropriate controls and putting those controls in place. Not blindly following rules and then hoping that that's going to keep us protected, but dynamically and part of business as usual, continually assessing risk and continually adapting and implementing our security controls. You don't need to go down a full ISO 27001 certification route, but what you can do is you can cherry pick from all of these standards. There's information within the surveillance camera code of practice and resultant strategy that is appropriate to all systems, not just surveillance systems. There's great guidance within the NIS directive that is appropriate to all organisations, not just operators of essential services. There's some fantastic guiding principles within GDPR and the new Data Protection Act 2018. Knowing what information you've got, knowing where it is, knowing why you've got it, knowing who needs to have access to it and why, knowing who you need to share it with and why. That's not just suitable for personal information, it's suitable for all your business information too. And 27001, a fantastic, broad spectrum business standard that can be adopted and applied regardless of the size of your organisation to help you to manage risk. At the end of the day, all of this comes back to a will to have good governance, good risk management and good security controls. Not because we have to, because we want to.